Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Judy Salerno, President Emeritus and Senior Scholar at the New York Academy of Medicine. NYAM is delighted to be able to host this Authors Night, and I'm honored to introduce this evening's speakers, both members of the NYAM family. They will be discussing their new book on the use of artificial intelligence in medicine and health. Now, a day doesn't go by when we don't hear something about artificial intelligence, known more commonly by the acronym AI. But nowhere has it generated as much buzz as in medicine and health, which is experiencing a revolution in big data and looking for the best use of that data. At this week's National Academy of Medicine annual meeting, the topic was revolutionizing the biomedical and health sciences. AI was mentioned by every keynote speaker and in every panel session. It's a fascinating topic with much opportunity and many challenges for us to approach. So tonight, we'll hear from two scholars who literally wrote the book on AI. Dr. Vimla Patel and Dr. Edward Shortliffe will discuss their newly published textbook, Intelligent Systems in Medicine and Health, The Role of AI, co-edited with Dr. Trevor Cohen. Now, Dr. Patel is a research scientist in cognitive studies in medicine at NYAM, an adjunct professor of biomedical informatics at Columbia's Vangelos College of Physicians and Surgeons. A cognitive and educational psychologist, she's an expert in the use of cognitive methods to analyze data for clinical decision-making and enhancing the use of data for safer health information technology. Dr. Patel is an elected fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, the American College of Medical Informatics, and the International Academy of Health Sciences Informatics. She was honored as the 2021 awardee of the William W. Stead Award for Thought Leadership in Informatics. Dr. Shortliffe, known to many of us as Ted, is Chair Emeritus and Adjunct Professor of Biomedical Informatics, also at Columbia Vangelos, and led the formation and implementation of graduate programs in biomedical informatics at Stanford, Columbia, and Arizona State Universities. He's an internal medicine physician and is also a PhD in computer sciences. Dr. Shortliffe is an elected member of National Academy of Medicine, NYAM, the American College of Medical Informatics, the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, and a Master of the American College of Physicians, and the recipient of numerous awards in recognition of his groundbreaking work. We'll hear from them about the potential for such technology to improve patient care, the barriers we face in order for this to take place, and the role of emerging technologies that will help us transform healthcare. There'll be time for questions and answers at the end of their presentations, but feel free during their presentations to put questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So now I'll turn it over to Vimla and Ted. Take it away.
Okay, let's see. Okay, so there we go. Thank you so much, Judy, for the wonderful introduction, and really greatly appreciated. I want to begin by saying that this is an edited book by Trevor Cohen, myself, and Ted. and with a number of authors who have contributed to this, this book, this series, or actually books in this series. So I want to start off with particularly tell you about this book. That ebook should be available anytime soon. In fact, we were expecting it to be available today, but it isn't. And but it should be sometime this week, hopefully. The hard copy will be available in November, and there are 20 chapters in this book, and it's 621 pages. It's not really very thick. It's easily, you can take it on your vacation, on your beach, to the beach, or you can even carry it while hiking. It's easy to read. And we made sure that we didn't make it any longer than 621 pages. This book is in a series called Cognitive Informatics in Biomedicine and Healthcare. And the book series is published by Springer, and I am the editor of that series. You may want to ask why such a series is necessary. We found that there was limited published volumes that combine the cognitive science and biomedical informatics, either for a reference book or even for instruction. For working professionals, scientists, and graduate students. And we considered it very important to have all these papers in one place, written by top people in the field. And secondly, the significant disparity between the scientific and technological knowledge that underlie healthcare practices, and the lay public beliefs and their mental representations of illness and disease. And therefore, the series addresses the key research gaps in biomedical informatics related to application of the cognitive theories, models, and frameworks for learning and evaluation. The pertinent areas include human-computer interaction, human factors as they apply to both clinicians and to the lay people. That other topics topics that are covered in other volumes in the same series include case studies in critical care, complexity and errors, human-computer interaction in healthcare, understanding and modeling health behaviors, re-engineering clinical workflow for safer and more efficient workplace, personal health informatics, patient participation in precision medicine, and natural language processing in biomedicine, a practical guide. Some of them are already published, and some, and the last one is still in progress, and the personal health informatics should be released also sometime this week or next week. With that, I think you've heard enough about the series, so now you know why it was important to have this intelligent machines in medicine and healthcare to be in this series as well. With that, I'm going to pass it on to Ted to talk about the meat of the talk today, about the book itself. Okay, thank you, Ted. You can take it.
Very good. Thank you, Vimla. It's a pleasure to have a chance to tell you about this, this new volume. We're a little frustrated it's not out quite yet. We thought it would be out last week, but I know it's imminent. And I'm going to share a couple of slides, although only a couple. As you see, the lead editor is Trevor Cohen. He's on this call and will be able to join us in the discussion period. He's not from here in New York and not from Columbia. He's from the University of Washington, although he was a PhD student at Columbia some years ago. That's how we know him so well. You know, Judy mentioned that you can hardly go a day without seeing something about some new application of AI in medicine. It's all over the newspapers and occasionally on television, on the web and social media. So it's hard for people not to be aware that suddenly in healthcare we're seeing tremendous experimentation. I just picked the most recent thing that came up on my screen for this slide. And, here we've got AI matching doctors in screening for tuberculosis. What isn't said there or in the article, when you actually read the full article, is very much about how that was evaluated. And so we have questions about the rigor of the measurement process in many of these applications, but they all sound very interesting and exciting, and they make people who are observing what's happening in healthcare excited about what might be possible. In fact, there's so much of this going on right now that it's becoming clear that we have to be better prepared to teach people about the field, its limitations, as well as its strengths and opportunities that exist. So here, this is just dated October 17th. Here I found a new research report that's basically calling for much more preparation and the development of clinical competencies for people who are health professionals, either in training or even in continuing education, so that they can learn more about this field, not necessarily as technical practitioners, but rather as people who will be informed users and evaluators and judges of such systems. Now, let me tell you a little bit about this field, because some people think it just suddenly appeared, but some of us have been working in this area a long time. The field probably got its name in 1956 when this fellow with the white hair you see there, John McCarthy, came up with the name when there was a meeting of computer scientists interested in mimicking human behavior and reasoning powers in computers. So he came up with the name artificial intelligence. The name has stuck. Not everybody likes that name, but I don't think it's ever going to go away. And now we just call it AI, and it's part of our everyday life, it seems. And I wanted to mention also, because some people think machine learning, which is a big part of what AI is today, is somehow new and newly appeared. But it's been part of AI since the very beginning. The notion that you should be able, maybe even to get computers to learn how to do things that the people that program them can't do. So this fellow, Art Samuel, who's pictured also on this slide, was an IBM researcher who played, the simple game of checkers. He got a computer. I don't mean robotic arms moving pieces. It's really all inside the computer. Where a playboard was represented computationally. He taught it the rules. He began to realize he wasn't particularly good checker player, and that maybe he could get the program to become an excellent checker player. And he did that by literally putting two versions of the computer on, of the program on two different computers, connected them to one another, and had the program play against itself, constantly learning, revising its scoring functions and its assessment of board locations and the like. And it ultimately became not only a superb checker player, but it beat the world champion in checkers and so forth. And this was literally 1960, 1961. So that's 60 years ago that machine learning was first being recognized as an important topic. But the computational requirements, you can imagine the kind of machines that might have been available to Art Samuel at IBM, hardly the kind of things you're going to have in your home or probably even in your office. So a lot has had to happen to make it as real as it is today. In the 1960s and 1970s is when the field of AI took off. There was substantial work done in those, which was the groundwork for what we're seeing today. Machine learning, certainly neural networks, natural language processing, which is getting computers to understand written text and understand their meaning and respond appropriately. Speech understanding, which is even more complicated, because first you need to understand a signal from a microphone, turn it into text, and then understand that text. But today we take it for granted in our Siris and Alexas that we have. But it took a long time to develop that technology. And then, and particularly of interest to us in medicine, is the notion of simulating human problem solving, and especially experts, and how they diagnose or make treatment decisions and manage patients. And that became of great interest to the medical computing community, which was small at that time. But we saw the emergence of a tremendous amount of artificial intelligence in medicine research, particularly focused on what we call knowledge-based systems. So I'm going to not talk from slides now, but rather just give you a bit of a feel for what's happened subsequently and why this book made so much sense to us, and why we've had the fun the last few years putting it together. The focus in those days, in the early days of AI in medicine, was all on knowledge, representing knowledge in computers, and the knowledge came largely from the heads of experts in clinical medicine. There was a concept called knowledge is power. It was a phrase that was coined by one of the early computer scientists named Edward Feigenbaum. He first introduced it in 1977, but it became a kind of mantra for the field of artificial intelligence. If you looked at a textbook of AI for a definition of what AI was in 1981, it would say AI is about getting computers to do the things that make human beings seem intelligent, to be able to reason symbolically, to acquire and to apply new knowledge, to communicate ideas, very different from the kinds of things computers had been doing with largely mathematical computations or manipulation of text in things like addresses so that you could send out bills by computer and stuff like that. Well, there was an explosive interest starting in the 1970s in knowledge-based systems in medicine. Some of you will have heard of them as expert systems. So medical expert systems were intended to help clinicians as consultants participating in diagnosis and treatment selection. The idea of expert systems really emerged from medicine, although it was ultimately a technology that was broadly applied in many other domains. And even industry experimented substantially with these methods, building systems within companies, selling products that would allow others to build expert systems. And by the end of the 1970s, the early 1980s, this was becoming an explosive topic with new expert system companies being formed, some with medical goals. The media became very enhanced with these ideas. They certainly embraced the notion. They wrote a lot of articles, and many of them featured medical examples. But they sort of overhyped the field, and by the late 1980s, we were hearing and seeing articles about how AI in medicine and in other areas too had been kind of a disappointment and had been oversold. And there was a period that began around 1988 that has been referred to affectionately as AI winter, the freezing of AI. It continued for about 6 to 8 years, well into the 1990s. But things started to change as we entered the 21st century. There were major forces afoot that were energizing AI and artificial intelligence in medicine. One of which was the increasing availability of digital data. In the case of medicine, this largely meant the introduction of electronic health records with large amounts of clinical data sets. Standards existed to support merging of these data sets from different providers, different institutions and the like, although that's still far from perfect to this day. Equally important were the huge changes in computational power that were enabled during the late 90s and the early 2000s with computers that suddenly were much faster than they had been before. Some of you may have heard of Moore's law about how much power and how much processing power you can fit onto a chip, a computer chip. There was also an incredible improvement in storage of digital data in smaller and smaller spaces. I think you've heard it said that your digital watch today or your cell phone has more memory and more storage capability than some of the biggest computers available when this field got started. And it's true that much has changed. There's been the miniaturization in general of much of what is needed, which allows more things to be put into small spaces and therefore machines that are much more powerful than was true before. And on top of all of this, there's been an amazing evolution in communications and networking, the ability to move data fast, to merge data in different locations and make it available. Obviously, the internet comes to mind. And remember that when this field started and when medical AI started, the internet didn't really exist yet, except in a very experimental form called the ARPANET. Well, these changes facilitated progress in machine learning, which had been very hard to really use well because of the lack of computational power to really do what was necessary. But with all this new power, machine learning began to take off. We also had large training data sets that could be used in the machine learning world. You've heard of big data, and that's a reference to the amount of data that suddenly could be used for a variety of purposes, including training machine learning programs. So there were many methodologic advances, including new forms of machine learning over time, something called deep learning, which has had a big impact, especially in imaging and radiology. And so medicine has been a major driver for a lot of this progress in AI. There's a lot else that you know that's going on in society that's leveraging AI as well, of course, self-driving cars, those personal assistants that I was mentioning before that can talk to you and have amazing ability to interpret and process and access things, always over the internet, of course. And then the predictive analytics, the ability to actually use the data that we have from what's happened in the past to predict what can happen in the future, a very important area. But there have been failings as well, or at least challenges. We have learned that some of these data sets that have been used to train deep learning or machine learning programs or algorithms themselves are not well balanced. They are not truly representative. And if you apply them in medicine with patients who are not similar to those that were in the training data sets, you can definitely see poor performance and maybe even some safety questions. There's also been some magical thinking that's evolved about maybe AI is simply going to replace physicians. They're so good at reading X-rays. Do we really need radiologists anymore? We can talk about that more in the discussion if that's of interest to you. And today, with machine learning, which is much more statistical and numerical in its form than those old knowledge-based systems that I described at the beginning of my remarks, we've seen real questions about whether we've thrown away that ability to emulate expertise of human beings, focusing much more on these big statistical approaches of the machine learning world. In the early days, there was a lot of focus on explanation, programs that could actually explain the basis for their reasoning because they had knowledge that they were using and could explain the reasoning steps that they had undertaken. This has become a major challenge in the machine learning world where it's really an area of ongoing research, but far from perfected, how you can actually give people insight and make these machine learning algorithms interpretable. That can affect trust, and in medicine, nothing's more important than your trust in sources of information that you're going to apply to real human beings. And so this is a very important part of the current scene. And then there have been some questions that I kind of intimated earlier about evaluation and what we should be measuring to determine whether something is ready for prime time. There's been a major focus, as that one slide I showed illustrated, on just how good it is at decision making relative to what others can do, human beings can do perhaps. But that tends to leave out the whole question of how would you actually integrate this kind of tool into a working environment in a way that makes sense. The accuracy of the decisions is clearly crucial, but what about the usability of the implementation and its ability to attract users? Is it sensitive to the workflow, which is such an important part of the medical scene? How well does it integrate with the other things one does? How well accepted are these kinds of advisors? If they're not accepted, why not? What is the impact that they have on the decisions that people make if they're offered this kind of support? And ultimately, of course, what's the impact on patients? Do patients do better if they're treated using some of these AI tools? And ultimately, at the end, is it cost effective? Whatever it costs to do this, are you getting enough benefit to justify that cost? So with that kind of introduction of this evolving field over 50, 60 years, I just want to say a few things about the textbook, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Vimla. There have been some real editing challenges. This is a book that we tried to feel as single authored as possible, but no one person could have written all the chapters in this book. So there's a lot of editing involved, and every chapter has learning objectives that are stated explicitly at the beginning of the chapter. We've introduced, especially the editors, copious cross-referencing among the chapters, pointing people to where things have been discussed in an earlier form and where they are now being discussed in a given chapter. So this gives a student or a reader an awareness of the overall volume and the flow of the discussion, and hopefully keeps them feeling that this is a kind of unified set of chapters, not just a collection of separate works. The book is very much conceptual rather than technical. It doesn't teach anybody how to program or anything like that. This is much more about the concepts that are important for understanding the field, and to complement those technical courses that a subset of readers might be interested in taking. Every chapter ends with suggested readings. These are annotated, tells you why you might want to go and pursue a topic in more depth. Each chapter has a bibliography for that chapter, and then there's a consolidated glossary for the entire book at the end. So just a few slides now to give you a sense for how the book is organized. It's broken up into 4 sections. There's an introductory section after a dedication, which I won't go into now. By the way, that URL at the top of your screen, you can jot down if you're interested. It will give you a lot more information on the book than I can do right now. So an introductory section, which basically introduces the field and explains why this is in the cognitive series and why we've brought a real cognitive informatics perspective to something that many people think of as become very mathematical and less cognitive. And we feel that's not consistent with what AI is and needs to be ultimately successful. There's a history chapter that goes into a lot more detail than I just have about the evolution of the field. And then the whole issue of data, which are the underlying grist upon which so much of AI today must work. The second section is about our approaches or methods. It starts with the knowledge-based systems like those from the 70s and 80s, but also shows how they've been modernized today. Then Vimla and Trevor have a chapter on the clinical informatics, clinical cognition issues as they relate to decision-making in medicine. And of course, machine learning. Then natural language processing, explainability, this issue of how well an AI system can actually give you insight into how it reaches decisions. And finally, and very relevant to medicine, a chapter about how to handle conversational back and forth between clinicians or health professionals and computers, and patients and computers as well. The next section is specifically about applications rather than methods. Integration of AI for clinical decision support, obviously an important topic. It's what many people think AI in medicine is, but there are all these other topics as well that are also very important. Predicting clinical outcomes. That's this predictive analytics notion as it applies in medicine. You've heard about programs trying to predict whether someone's going to become septic, perhaps. That's predictive analytics. But as I'll mention, if you look down to chapter 15, health systems management, in the C-suite of large healthcare systems, there's a great deal of interest in predictive analytics, taking data about the patients, about the physicians, about the financing and the like, to try to actually put together predictions that help to develop policy and approaches. Medical imaging is a huge area of work in this area, and there's a very nice chapter on that topic. Public health, where AI especially became a burgeoning and important part during COVID. In the precision medicine area, bioinformatics, that is taking the genomics and the proteomics base of our knowledge and merging it into direct patient care. And the final chapter in that section on learning and education and AI, and obviously this has a big cognitive component. Learning and education depends on that kind of expertise, and is another reason for having this cognitive emphasis in the book. And finally, we end with some material on the future of AI in medicine, an entire chapter on evaluation and some of those points I was mentioning before about the things that need to be evaluated beyond simply the excellence of the decision-making. The whole topic of ethics and policy issues, regulation, biasing, representativeness in data sets and the like. A clinician's view, a data scientist physician, anticipating how clinicians are going to incorporate AI ideas and methods and tools into the way in which they practice medicine from a clinician's perspective. And then we kind of look back on the entire book in the final chapter and try to project a little bit into the future, recognizing that that's always hard to do, but worth a try. So I'll close with this. I just saw this literally yesterday. If you'll notice, that's October 18th. But it allows me to make a point that I wanted to end with, and that is, this is a journey we're nowhere close to the end of. And I've emphasized how important the evolution of the technology has been to where we are now with AI in medicine. In that power of today's computers compared to what we started with when the field began. But there's constant change like this one. Here's something I never even heard of until yesterday, a new kind of number, which if used in the way in which computers are implemented and information is stored in computers, can have a huge multiplier effect on processor speed and accuracy. So these are the kind of things that are going on all the time, and we know 10, 20, 30, 40 years from now, it's going to be fascinating too. But we hope that this is a book that helps people move effectively in that direction. So with those remarks behind me, I will turn it back to Vimla, who's going to talk about the cognitive informatics emphasis.
Okay, there we go. I think that's enough about intelligent systems. Let's talk about intelligent people who design these intelligent systems and intelligent people who use them, or at least try and use them. See if I can get the slides. Okay, just a moment. Trying to share. A little challenging here. I'm getting there. Okay. Now let's see if we can share now. Screen share and okay, can you see it or not? No. All right, let's see.
It's on the screen.
Yeah, okay, I think we can see.
You have to start the show.
All right, there we go. Sorry, I'm technologically challenged a little bit. So I don't want to take too long right now. Just want to explain to you why we even bother with the cognitive aspect with this book at all. The thing is that we've talked about intelligent systems. We have talked about that how important they are and how we see every day about hear about it and use them, these systems that have changed people's lives in many ways or have found challenges they're dealing with. Now, why we consider it so important that we have to include a cognitive component to this. There is the medical AI system or the intelligence system that we develop. This based on fundamental medical cognition. In other words, the way people think, the basic research that is done in medical cognition, which even goes back further to the basic sciences or the study of cognition itself. So, for example, there's organization of clinical and basic science knowledge. And in medical AI, you use that principles and guidance from there and methodological underpinnings to use in development and use of medical knowledge bases for intelligent systems. Medical problem solving and decision making is used in medical AI and decision support systems. Radiological and dermatological diagnosis, you use it in the visual analytic machine learning. And so on. If you get perceptual processing of patient display data, data display is in biomedical information visualization. When you learn from medical text and medical discourse analysis, which is really natural language processing in AI. So the diagnostic and therapeutic reasoning is clinical support system. You have natural language in clinical practice, or natural intelligence in clinical practice, is the artificial intelligence in problem solving or environment for collaborative problem solving. What it really says is that basic research in cognition or medical cognition is necessary to be used in development of the AI systems, so that you have the basic understanding of how people use it, what are the challenges, and the understanding of that to be able to build these systems. And this is why there is a relationship between the medical cognition and medical AI. I work in the domain of medical cognition, but further back, I was in the psychology department before I came into the medical domain. We used to understand just basic learning from text, any text. It could be visual, it could be learning from watching TV, or you can be reading a text, or listening to somebody speaking. All of those is analysis of text, and that applies now to multimedia analysis and kinds of things you do. So they are still very fundamentally very important. What are the some of the things that we need to worry about here that to attend to cognitive issues? What are the things that we need to worry about in this book? Now, one is that AI and cognitive science both bring paradigmatic approaches, and they are cross-specialization of others. They have approaches of their own. They're not really, they didn't grow up together. The cognitive science includes the theories from language, cognitive anthropology, psychology, artificial intelligence, computer science, philosophy, and you have theories and methods from those sciences that can be used in the understanding of the AI systems. You can have the cross-fertilization of ideas. Now, there are two ways this field has started to merge, or in the evolution of this AI system, there are two ways being developed. One is translation from science, basic science, to the application, designing computer programs that are intelligent, autonomous, and human-like. And they either match a human or even do better than them. For example, chess can do that. Second one is a really application goal, which is that you work in the human-centered AI research to make sure that it is human-centered, that humans can use it, is to develop this and widely used in healthcare products. They develop healthcare products which can be widely used. People usually want to have a control of the technology. If I'm using a system, I want to have a control over it, not someone telling me how I should do it. And that respectfully supports and empowers the creativity. I want to be able to do it the way I want to do it, not someone that says, no, you have to do it this way, because I won't do it that way. If this is not the way I normally do things, I will find another way to do it, which will not be how the system is supposed to organize me to do. So the whole research area has shifted from building something that is like humans to empowering humans to do something more than the limitations they have, something more than that. And this issue is brought up very nicely by Ben Shneiderman in one of the papers on design lessons from AI and having the two grand goals of human emulation and useful application. The final thoughts, just the final thoughts about the AI and cognition in this book. The perspective offered in this book summarizes the current approaches, the following, while highlighting the work that remains still to be done. Okay, so these are the things that cross across many chapters in a subtle ways, and some of them are much more overt. One is to unite the strengths of people and machines when optimizing value for data. Don't try and just use machine things or people things. They need to unite the strengths of the people can do something that machines can't. Machines can do something that people can't. So you need to use this strength. Augment human instinct. Human instinct is to do something one way. You augment it. Make sure you enhance it to do it that way with smart algorithms that provide the past-driven predictive insights. Not try and, just try and suppress the human instinct and do it the way the system does, but augment it. Reduce biases in AI system. The biases do sneak in from various, particularly imbalanced data sources is one way. And unfortunately, that can reinforce existing biases by system users. Continue collaborative efforts of AI system development, researchers with cognitive and social scientists, and with the local, either you have the professionals or lay people who are part of the team. You must have collaborative, so you have many perspective of working with it. This is one of the biggest drawbacks, because if you don't understand the environment, you don't understand the people who are working with, that the systems, no matter how intelligent they are, they will not be used or supported by humans. Won't be useful, it won't be usable, and it will not be safe. So with that, I want to stop, and just to say that cognition is a big part of the AI systems, or developing intelligent human beings as a part of intelligent machines. I'll pass it on to Ted so that he can introduce Trevor.
Okay, we thought before we go to any questions that we would let Trevor Cohen say a few words. Vimla, I think you can leave your camera on too at this stage. We don't have any more slides. So Trevor, join us with both video and sound, and give you a moment or two to weigh in.
Yeah, thanks very much. So I'm not going to say too much because I want to leave space for the discussion. You know, it's such a topical concern, AI, that I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions. But one of the things I was thinking, and thanks very much for the overview of the book as well. I think it was all covered in a lot of detail, and you made a very clear case as well for why now is the time we need a book like this. When I was listening, it brought to mind some of the themes that have run through the book. So, I think we were quite deliberate in trying to find authors that had a long view of the field, people that have been involved in many cases in AI and medicine since the inception of the field. And one of the questions that arose, as we were developing the book was, well, what's changed? We've had a shift in the methods that are used in AI from methods that were taught to solve problems in the way that human experts do to methods that learn to solve problems by whatever means are necessary. And, in that we've gained something and we've lost something. And, what we've lost, I think, is the ability of these systems to explain themselves in terms that people can understand. And what we've gained potentially is systems that approach problems in ways that are very different to how people do. And there's a sort of inherent complementary nature to that, because if they solve problems in different ways, they're likely to make different errors. And, perhaps together, the whole will be more than its parts. Maybe all I have to add to that is just to say, in terms of our motivation for developing this book, like one of the things that led us to develop it was a need that was expressed by people we were meeting. And in my case, the clinical informatics fellows, people who are practicing medicine that have gone on to get additional specialized expertise in informatics. Like my dialogue with our fellows was very motivating in the sense that these are people who have, in a way, that grown up around technology and AI in their everyday lives and have a sense of its ability to support tasks, and are frustrated by the limited degree to which they see this manifesting in their professional lives, and have a lot of great ideas for ways in which to apply these methods that are different than the sorts of well, let's replace a doctor diagnosing tuberculosis from an X-ray, newsworthy articles that we see. And so, a big part of, I think, all of our motivation, but, specifically mine, was to try to find the right content, to build a bridge between people who have deep knowledge of the domain and people who have the knowledge of AI methods, so that the next wave of AI applications are like deeply rooted in problems that are of importance to practicing clinicians and to institutions. And I think with that, perhaps we should open up for discussion.
It strikes me that we might want to clarify for some of the people who are watching the webinar just what a clinical informatics fellow is. I mean, we now actually have a new subspecialty that's approved by the American Board of Medical Specialties that has fellowships for physicians who are boarded in any one of the main boards, any specialty in medicine, and they can do subspecialty certification and fellowships now in clinical informatics. So they are indeed a perfect audience, it seems to me, for this kind of book, because they live right at that intersection and will in their jobs in the future. And you're working with them there at UW, I assume, and hear that need from them, right?
Right. Yeah. Like.
Thank you all, Vimla, Trevor, Ted, for a wonderful discussion. And we have some questions that came in. I would remind everybody to type your questions in the Q&A box. The first question is, while AI has been the topic of talk everywhere, its adoption is still just at the beginning. What are the major obstacles you've observed for the major health systems to adopt AI solutions in their clinical workflow? And if it's related to mental representation, how do we bridge that gap? So I think that's a question for all of you.
Shall I take that, Ted? You want to take it first?
No, you can start. Go ahead.
Yeah. You just mentioned the word clinical workflow. One of the challenges we face, at least from research point of view, is that people using these systems in the say hospital system, they think they know they're doing the clinical workflow. Clinical workflow just basically meaning, what do these people do in everyday life and when they work around there before the introduction of the AI system? And when you introduce the AI system, how has the workaround changed in any way that has any negative or unintended consequences of that? Not very often the work is done very well in clinical workflow. They do the work and the thought is that, oh, I think this is going to work because I think they're going to make sure that this is going to fit into that, because what they do, they can easily fit in the system. You need a formal analysis. You really need to do a formal analysis of clinical workflow and then see how it impacts that. Not very often this is done. And as far as the knowledge representation goes, there's another issue. And I'll leave that a discussion of that until others have a chance to weigh in a little bit. Ted?
Well, there actually are some areas in which there's a fair amount of adoption now, and it has to do with the different use models for these kinds of systems. Some uses of AI are almost like ordering a test. Okay, there's not a lot of interaction with the system. You ask, you get an MRI and someone runs the MRI through a image processing system that has an AI component, and it spits out an interpretation, and you have the images, and you get a report. So it's a lot like it has always been when you're simply ordering that kind of information. It's just that some of the information has come out of an AI system. And we're seeing, radiology is being transformed in particular by this kind of methodology. But one of my former students, who is a radiologist and an AI researcher, said, look, radiologists are not going to be replaced by these kinds of systems, even though it's taking off like crazy in radiology. But radiologists that use AI systems will replace radiologists that won't use AI systems, that it's that crucial to their practice in the future. It's when you get into these systems that are designed for direct interaction with clinicians, where you're literally interacting with the computer. Suddenly, human-computer interaction, workflow sensitivity, all those kinds of things become much more crucial. So the question, we could answer quite positively. It's not so bad right now in the case of certain imaging applications, but for actual use in day-to-day clinical care by clinicians who are interacting with a computer for help, we're far away from having systems that are well accepted. There's been a lot of work, and I would say there are two big issues that need to be addressed. One is the whole issue of trust, and trust is incredibly dependent upon insight into the basis for the recommendation that you're getting from the computer. And if you don't have any insight, if it's kind of take it or leave it, we used to say with the old statistical systems 40 years ago that you would never be interested in a computer that says your patient has appendicitis, 0.87 probability, and take them to the OR. And why do you think they have appendicitis? What's it? You want to know why. So this explanation issue, this ability to actually better understand the basis for whatever is coming out of the computer, in a world in which we're really trying to help clinicians make better decisions, not have the decisions made for them in such important areas, that becomes a very important consideration. So explanation is certainly one. The other, frankly, I think this question kind of recognizes that there could be local implementation and acceptance barriers by institutions and maybe licensing boards and the like. And so the question is, how well are we evaluating and demonstrating the value of these systems? And there, I think, actually, if anybody's taken it seriously, it's academia, and the companies that sell these kinds of systems are doing a terrible job of evaluating them by the criteria that I think should be applied. Judy, you got to unmute.
Oh, sorry. We have a couple more questions that I'd like to try and get in. One relates specifically to the book. What prerequisites are needed to appreciate the contents? Would you recommend for college and/or graduate courses, disciplines beyond MI, business, engineering? So let's hear about the uses of your book.
I would say it was written with the intention of being available for teaching graduate courses in biomedical informatics, but we have recognized as we go through it that it, like the clinical informatics fellows we were talking about, because it's conceptual more than technical, folks that don't necessarily have a technical background in business or management, consulting or something like that might well still get a lot out of most of the book. Some of it might be a little hard for them to read. So, undergraduates, I mean, there was a time not too long ago, and I think I know who this question's coming from, and I know that she's well aware that their institutions, and she's from Arizona State University, is one of the first to have actually created an undergraduate major in biomedical informatics. And at one time I might have said, no, this is a graduate course, usually, and the like, but we've seen some marvelous students go through the undergraduate program at ASU. And I would think an advanced student at the undergraduate level who has the appropriate background could also use this book. Trevor, do you have any other thoughts about that, and who the audience is beyond what I've said?
Well, so I guess we've covered graduate students, undergraduate students, generally interested people. I think I'd really like to see people with a clinical background read this book, who may not have graduate or undergraduate coursework in informatics or computer science. And I think, the accessibility varies from chapter to chapter, but as you said, like a lot of the more conceptual chapters are hopefully quite approachable. And, the goal there would be to give someone the perspective they need to become an effective user, or to inform decisions around whether or not to deploy systems in the clinic.
I think the people in the field of cognitive science who want to know how, if they want to cross over to the area of health and medicine, would benefit from this book by knowing how their work could be useful, where it could be applied, could also be beneficial.
Thanks. We have time, I think, for another question. There are, I'm sure, a million. This discussion could go on for hours, but interesting question. What would you suggest as next steps in terms of research for designing usable AI and implementing in real-world clinical practice?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure everybody has a lot to say in it, but for me, it's kind of no-brainer. You just have to understand the real-world practice first. What is the real world practice where you're trying to implement the system? What does it look like? Understanding it. Who are the people involved? Understanding that before you start to even implement anything. And who are the players and how you can work collaboratively that will help you to design something that is useful to them and usable to them and also safe. And so that's where I would start. I would let the others weigh in.
Well, the question was specifically about what additional research is needed, I think. And it seems to me that this issue of bringing the expert knowledge back into the equation and merging it with some of the more modern approaches is really an untapped and crucial area for work. If trust depends upon explanations, and explanations depend upon being able to express a line of reasoning, then machine learning programs are just not going to hack it for that, not in their current form. So how do you begin to look for a synthesis of knowledge-based approaches with the very powerful machine learning approaches of today? Because we realize that those people who are trying to generate explanations from a neural network, for example, in a deep learning program, are really finding themselves stymied and using rather, I think, inadequate ways of trying to make the case to a human being who's observing it. I don't mean that there's not work going on. There is. A lot of it, though, doesn't, I think, harken back to some of that knowledge representation and expertise work of 20 and 30 years ago, which properly, reinstituted and merged into the machine learning world could have a big impact. Trevor, you wrote about this in the final chapter a bit. Do you want to say something more about that?
Well, I think the shift in perspective back to leveraging knowledge in these systems is one of the recurring themes that we observe throughout the book. And, not just throughout the book, but in the AI community at large, even beyond medicine and the deep neural network community, there's been a real call for knowledge-based systems because, a system that can't reason, can't explain itself. Just one point I wanted to add to the question, building on what's been said already, is the idea of like team cognition. Like what does an effective clinical team look like when part of the team is a person and part of the team isn't? And what do the members of such a team need to know about one another and their strengths and weaknesses and their decision process in order for the team to function effectively? I think that'll be a really fertile area for research moving forward.
So team cognition in the real world would be something that would be a great place to start if you were to do something that would implementable thing for the research. Yeah.
Well, I'm afraid we're out of time. This has been such an incredible discussion, and you've certainly piqued my interest and I want to learn more. So then the name of the book is Intelligent Systems in Medicine and Health by Cohen, Patel, and Shortliffe. And this video of this webinar will be available on NYAM's website. So please, if you have friends who weren't able to join us today, in a very few days, it will be up and available. So thank you very much. I appreciate your attendance, your interest, and good luck with the book. I hope it's widely taken up because we certainly need to really understand so much more about this important topic in medicine and health.
Terrific. Thank you.
Thank you, Judy.
Thank you.
Thank you.